Hi guys, today you're going to start the Screwtape Letters. That's going to be your reading for this weekend, for today actually. It's due today, and then on into the weekend if you want to read the second part you may. This is called the Screwtape Letters, this work. It's by C.S. Lewis. It is actually an entire book. However, you're just going to be reading the excerpts that our literature book includes. So before you do that, I would like us to just kind of consider a few things about this work together. I want you to know that this story is a series of letters. That's why it's called the Screwtape Letters. Okay? Its speaker is not C.S. Lewis. You will understand that as soon as you jump into this work. You will understand that, especially if you read the introductory material in your book, which I'm pulling a little bit from as well. So you will see that this is an unreliable narrator. That is what eventually you'll need to put on your soapstone. You'll know that he's unreliable as soon as you realize that Screwtape is a demon, and it has long had the job of following Satan, and as he's employed by Satan, his job is to lead people away from God. Now, he is mentoring young Wormwood, his nephew, who is new to the job of leading people away from God. So these letters are letters to Wormwood in which he is mentoring him and helping him grow and develop in his profession, basically. Okay? So it is a very interesting work in that it's sort of delving into the human condition of the fact that there is a spiritual world and we are drawn away from God by our human nature and by Satan and his fallen angels followers. I mean, this is true. And so this is just sort of exploring what conversations these demons might be having with one another around what, is true of the world. So it's a very interesting story. Now, when we consider the speaker, we need to understand that not only is he a narrator, he is an unreliable narrator. He is not trustworthy. He's a demon. We can't trust a demon, right? And so we're not going to be able to agree with him. We're going to actually think quite the opposite of the narrator often, okay? We and C.S. Lewis himself can agree with the narrator on the point of humans being selfish people, petty people, sinful people, easily drawn away, right? A lot of times. We can't agree with the human nature, the sin nature of humans. But we will totally, I know you will find that you're in complete disagreement with his perspective of who God is, who this narrator's perspective, not Lewis's, but the narrator's perspective of God, because he questions God, and he questions the reason that God would draw people to himself for salvation. He's very skeptical of God, and so you'll find yourself disagreeing a lot with this narrator as you read. So this work is actually an example of structural irony, because as you read the entire structure of the work, you will constantly have to invert the ideas that you read, flip them around in your mind and say, no, the opposite of that is true. Except for those points about humans. Once in a while, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, well, we as a people are kind of like this. Yes, I have these same struggles, you might say. But the rest of his perspective is opposite, completely opposite throughout the work of what is true. And so this is an excellent example of structural irony. You'll also note a lot of verbal irony in it, but if you can't find it, we'll find it together in the end, okay? So this is what Lewis wanted his readers to understand in his preface, which I will say he didn't tell his first group of readers, his first audience. He neglected to tell them that, and we'll talk about the results of that in a second. But for those who read subsequent copies of this, he says this. He says, readers are advised to remember that the devil is a liar. Not everything that Screwtape says should be assumed to be true, even from his own angle. And so what happened to one of the readers as he initially got the publication from the Guardian where this work was published, I'll talk to you about that, but he totally misinterpreted this. And he ended up canceling his subscription to the Guardian. And this is what he said. He said that he was canceling on the grounds that the advice given by Screwtape was, quote, not only erroneous, but positively diabolical. And so he completely misunderstood what was going on in this work. And so after that, Lewis said, maybe I should have a little preface to accompany this so that people right from the onset know what's going on here, which is why I wanted to have this little introductory video so that you know what's going on, although you can read it in the information in your book as well. So let's just look at this. I found a website that I really like. This author did a really nice job of putting this together, this blog about this, so that you can see that publication. And this is the interesting thing, and I want to say, considering Soapstone, so we just talked about the speaker being an unreliable narrator, and now we can consider the first audience. And so you can put something like this. The first audience was a group of readers that subscribed to a publication. Some would call it a newspaper, some would call it a magazine, called The Guardian. Here's the front cover of it right here. They call it a church newspaper. I've read some works that refer to it as a magazine, okay? In any case, it was just this little publication that came out. And so the first audience, they actually had to read this work chapter by chapter and wait for the next chapter. They didn't get the experience of being able to pick up the whole entire book and read it from cover to cover and be able to, know the end right away. They had to wait. And that often was the case in these earlier works. I wanted to say about it that, let me show you. The man that published it, the publisher of The Guardian, was very excited to be able to have the opportunity to publish something by C.S. Lewis, which was interesting that he understood the value of Lewis, because actually at that time, he wasn't well known like he is now. We know exactly who C.S. Lewis is. He published the Chronicles of Narnia, right? But at the time, only those in academia actually understood the value of C.S. Lewis and his works. And so this publisher was really onto something when he was excited about being able to publish this new work by Lewis in his magazine. I also wanted to tell you that if you're considering the audience, then the very first audience would have been a group of believers. And so C.S. Lewis knew that he was writing to people who understood about this struggle and understood what a good God we have. And, in other words, he was, think about the author's purpose then. He was writing to people who have these spiritual struggles of being pulled away from our good God. And, they would understand that that's happening. Whereas if he was writing in a public publication, he could be writing to people that didn't even really understand that struggle was going on. You know what I mean? So he knew that he had an informed audience in terms of spirituality and Christianity. Okay? One other thing I do want to point out before I let you go here is that Lewis was a newer believer at this time. He was a younger author, younger believer. And so he does seem like he might be having some inaccuracies in his own beliefs about salvation and the assurance of it. Some people in chapter 2 would read some of what he says and think maybe he's leaning towards the ability to lose your salvation, which is just not biblical. But in the end, C.S. Lewis did understand the blessedness of the assurance of salvation, and that once you are God's, he will never let you go. He will never let me go. In Hebrews, he says, I will never leave thee. And so if you happen upon that and kind of interpret that the same way, it is true that he may have grappled with that idea earlier on in his walk, but he got that settled. So just, kind of throwing that out there just in case you read it and say, okay, now what's going on in this part, right? And so again, as you read it, you're just going to remember, I'm constantly needing to flip these ideas and say, I agree with the opposite of this narrator's perspective. Okay, you need to understand that this narrator, Screwtape, is witty, but he's also cold, and he is completely against God. And so you'll see that in this work. So I'm not actually sharing with you today a soapstone. I want you to annotate, get out some post-it notes or index cards, see what you can find. There will be some metaphors that you can see. There's going to be some situational, verbal irony that you will see. There's going to be some some personification, and let's see, there will be some parallelism, similes that you'll find, alliteration in the second part that you will find that you're not even necessarily assigned to today. All right, so be looking for those things, but I am going to literally point them out to you. You're not going to be graded on them because I just kind of want you to enjoy reading this work and seeing its value. And of course, they'll tick soapstone off in your mind. You know what I mean? Like as you read, just be like, okay, well, I know who the speaker is now. What would be the subject of this? And what's the theme of this? What's the author's purpose? Be thinking through those, but I'm not going to literally have you stopping and typing everything in today because I want you just to read the work. All right. I have tried to produce this particular little talk several times now, and so I'm not even going to worry about my missteps with personification or any of the other blurbs that wording that I stumbled over. I am just going to give this to you because it is 8:32 and I have been trying to do this for a long time, trying to get everything just right for you. So I hope you'll forgive me for those mistakes and realize that I too am human. I do want to point out at the top of this page here that this is a really good blog post if you have time in your life to read it. I can't really vouch for the rest of this person's blog, but he seems to really have a good understanding of some of the works that he refers to on it. So I'm just pointing that out to you that you might want to look into that. Have a wonderful day. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much for your hard work. Thank you for commenting underneath as I share verses and most recently hymns. Thank you for interacting because we're not in the building together, and that interaction is very precious. I really do appreciate your willingness to just take a couple of moments and interact online. Thank you for your rough drafts. I will get to each of them as soon as I can. I'm praying for you guys. I do miss you. I miss seeing you in the hallways and seeing you in class. I am praying for you, I promise, by name, with certain situations that come to my heart about each one of you. I mean, specific request is what I mean by that. Again, I'm stumbling and I'm not going to be a perfectionist. I'm getting this to you so you can listen to it and move on with your day. Have a wonderful. Bye-bye.